Good morning and welcome to our show.
Okay, can I just have the real Robert Spencer?
As soon as I find him, indeed, in
Indeed,
veritable sooth.
in veritable sooth. Okay, Shakespeare. Okay,
Yes.
okay, so I will start. So, hello and welcome to Personal Journeys to Difficult Truths, Understanding Islam, Understanding the West. This is Elsa, and today I have with me Robert Spencer of JihadWatch and Did Muhammad Exist? So, welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm going to tell people a little bit about you, and then we're going to go into the interview.
Okay.
So, who is Robert Spencer? Well, you're the
Who
director.
indeed.
Well, I don't know if we're going to get quite to the root of that, but yes. So, but today we'll do a little tiny bit on one, your accomplishments, and then, yes, maybe a little bit on who is the man who has accomplished all these things. So, accomplishments. You're the director of Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. You're the author of 12 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Muslim... Oh, oops. And The Politically Incorrect... I don't know. I usually can speak English. And The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. Your latest book, Did Muhammad Exist? It's an inquiry into Islam's obscure origins. So, what else? You are the Associate Director of the American Freedom Defense Initiative. You're a weekly columnist for Front Page Magazine. And you've written a dozen monographs and over 300 articles about jihad and Islamic terrorism. In short, I could say you're amazingly prolific. You're also research and fact-oriented, and you're excellent at getting your message across to the world. As I found watching you in a bunch of YouTube videos, you're also very pleasant, amiable, courteous, and you have a sense of humor.
Very
Delightful.
kind.
It's not kind. Like, I enjoy your humor, like in Jihad Watch. People who have misunderstood the Quran have once again
Yes,
found themselves...
misunderstanders of Islam. Yes, they're all over the place.
Exactly.
We're constantly told that Islam teaches peace and tolerance, and yet we see on a daily basis Muslims behaving violently and with great intolerance. And so, by taking them at their word, consider all those people to be misunderstanders of Islam.
I absolutely agree with you.
Tens of thousands of them, apparently.
I believe that that's a very low estimate.
Indeed.
So, I am delighted to have the chance to interview, to hear a bit about who is Robert Spencer.
Who indeed?
Yes. So, like your most recent book, Did Muhammad Exist? But that's not where you started. Could we start?
No, you start with Did Spencer Exist?
Did Spencer? No, we start with what were you like as a boy? Are there any clues? You're so prolific. You are so outspoken. You're on every radio, TV, YouTube, etc. What were you like as a kid? Could anyone have predicted this guy is going to go and, were you issue? Were you politically, were you like interested in world events? What were you like as a kid?
Yeah, I was interested in world events, but I was just a writer. I was always a writer. I remember in first grade, the usual, what do you want to be when you grow up question from the teacher, and everybody's saying, fireman and a doctor and this and that. And I said a writer. That was all I ever was. I wrote a novel when I was in high school. I still have that. And I wrote all kinds of stories and plays and things. When I was starting, I remember when I was about 6, commandeering my mother's typewriter and starting to write. And that's all I can do.
That's amazing because you are someone who uses your voice a lot. Like writers use their fingers.
Interesting thing. That actually comes from the old man.
The old man, your father?
To mean any disrespect, but my father was an announcer. And when I was in my early teens, he was with the Voice of America, and he would take me into work in Washington, and he would be hosting this news features show, and he would be taping it and would tell me, you can come into the booth while I'm taping it, but you have to be very quiet. You can't make a sound, or it will be heard all around the world. And I was very impressed by that. And so I would go in and listen, and sometimes I'd be there at work with him all day, and I didn't have anything to do. You know, it was summer, and sitting around in these offices, and this was the days of reel-to-reel tape machines, and so he would give me an old reel-to-reel tape and put me at a machine out of the way, and I would edit the tape and record my own things, take old scripts and things from the VOA and record them myself. And I was just having fun. You know, I was like 12 years old or something. And he would actually come and say, no, 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 you didn't say that right. You have to enunciate more clearly. If you were speaking on the air, you have to speak a little more slowly than you would ordinarily so that people can hear you. But you have to do it in a natural tone so that they don't get bored listening. And he taught me all these things, and it made me very impatient because I didn't want to, I was just playing. I wasn't trying to learn a craft. But that was the craft he had to teach me, and he did, how to speak in public.
An interesting combination, your own inner desire to write, to get the words out. Were you writing political things then, like when you were writing plays, or were they like love stories, or were they Western adventures? What was
They
gripping your
were,
imagination?
yeah, actually the novel is about this charismatic demagogue who takes over the United States. And I think that we're getting, unfortunately, close to that kind of thing happening. And so there was some political content to it, but it was a bit fanciful. It wasn't any kind of general analysis. Oh, I also remember that I was very interested in American history, and I wrote a history of the presidents of the United States when I was about 13 and typed it up, and I was very proud of that. And anyway, I wasn't your average kid in these ways, certainly.
It sounds like you were proud of those American presidents.
Oh, yeah, well, of course. I mean, nowadays, I don't know how I would do with the new ones, but in, in those days, it went up to about Gerald Ford. And, you know, there was, of course, the huge Watergate thing. But I remember showing that to my seventh grade teacher, and I wrote this. And he said, you typed this out? You copied this from somewhere? And I said, no, 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 I wrote it. And, you know, it wasn't the sort of thing he was used to dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you were always way ahead of the average kid, if I can say that, because the interest of a 6-year-old is very rarely, I want to be a writer. But on the other hand, why not know it? I mean, how old was Mozart when he wrote his first stuff, like 3 or 5 or something? In
No
other words,
Mozart. One day I'd like to write something worthwhile. I mean, I like what I write. I'm proud of what I write. I stand by it. But it doesn't have any value as writing. And when I respect good writing, I love good writing. And one day I really want to write something good.
what would that be? Would that be back like that fantasy that you were writing, or what would good
Not a
writing be for you?
fantasy. Novels are truer. Great literature is truer than reality. It expresses truths that are larger than day-to-day events. And so I can tell you, as I said, that I'm proud of what I've written, and it's true, and it's necessary, and it's important to get it out right now because this is a major international crisis that we're going through, and there doesn't seem to be any willingness at high levels to deal with it honestly. And so I'm happy to have been able to contribute to some reality about that. But if I were able to write, and I still kind of think one day maybe I will, something that deals with deeper and more lasting human situations, then I will die happy.
Well, I hope you give yourself maybe 15 minutes a day in the morning to try to do that.
Oh, I've
No,
thought
no,
about
I
it every
no, no,
which way.
no. I think if people make something an emotional priority, I understand how important all you're doing is. By the way, I that's part of why I'm so delighted that you agreed to be interviewed by me. I'm another of those creative people. So
Mm,
another side of myself is as a lyric writer or as a spoken word person. And one of the pieces I wrote a couple of months ago is I live freedom, not
mhm.
chains, not death. I live freedom with each breath. So, and I'm doing that with my little band. The three of us are just doing that. And
Oh, that's wonderful.
a goal of that is that I believe that the anti-jihad movement doesn't have the creative works, it doesn't have an anthem. So when I wrote that, it felt, this is our anthem. I live
Mhm.
freedom. So,
Well, you're quite right. I mean, actually, this is something. I don't know if I'm ever going to write something. I might, but it's fraught with difficulty. One thing that I think is that if I write something fictional, it will be parsed by certain people to see what in it is autobiographical, and I don't want to get into that. I don't talk about my personal life, and I'm not intending to. But actually, your point is very important and well taken. And I've actually been nagging my friend and colleague Pamela Geller, who said once in an interview that the reason why she's fighting is for art and music and love and all these things that are valued by the West that are not valued in Islamic culture. And I thought that's a great point and a
mm-hmm.
positive point, and something that she actually does at her site with the music every Friday and the movie every Saturday and art featured every now and again. And I said to her that she really ought to put a book together of art and music and love, however that might, whatever form that might take in the book, and try to show the positive things for which we are fighting. And I hope one day she does that.
I hope you do too. And I will say, I've written so much personal stuff, and I realize none of it would work in a Sharia world. And I'd really love that to be totally clear to everyone in the West.
Yes, that would be good.
Um, and to really move somebody, it really is to touch the emotions. That, in
Yes.
fact, is why I'm doing these interviews, because the facts are so much out there. But very often people have no idea who are these people. It's just like somehow or other you automatically sprang up and spoke about jihad. Not like, who is Robert Spencer that he was
Yeah,
willing to...
it's a funny thing that you say that because it reminds me of a time when there was all kinds of upheaval, all kinds of amazing things going on in my private life, and all kinds of transformative events happening, such that I was working, but my mind was barely on it at all. I was berated in an email by this this woman who works in sort of the same field, but for various reasons we were at odds. And she wrote me and said that she actually wrote it as a statement, like she knew that I had not written a single line or a single email over the last year that didn't have to do with Islam or jihad. And I thought, if only you knew, lady. But anyway, this is the thing that people think. Yes, you're quite right, that this is all and everything that I do, when actually it's just one part of many, many things. But, of course, I don't discuss those things. That's not why anybody's interested in me anyway. They don't want to know if, what books I read or what instrument I play or what else I want to write. They want to know what I think about jihad and Islam because they know that I've been an honest broker about it and that I have told the truth in ways that other people have not.
I think that people are interested in who is the person as well. And my interest is, who is the person who, for whom it was right to do this? So you've talked about being a boy, and you were interested in American history, wrote about all these American presidents, and then you had a father who was doing voice for America, Voice of America. I'm sorry, I'm not American, so I don't know all these things off by heart.
Yeah, Voice of America is in Washington at 4th and Independence, and it's sort of the American version of Radio Free Europe. In the Cold War, they were very intent on broadcasting to the communist world, but also to places like South America and Africa, and that's where I would pick Dad's from. I would get it on the shortwave from these places where they were trying to give a positive vision of American life and of a Republican form of government and so on. And now it still exists, but it's a very different thing, of course. Now, the U.S. government is all about promoting Sharia and Islamic rule and not in opposing it, in spite of the numerous human rights violations involved in it. And so that's actually, anticipating your question to say, well, made me think that I ought to do this.
Yeah,
Well,
and
yeah.
also before that, I've gotten you up
Hmm.
to boyhood. I'm presuming that you had some life before you got interested in Islam and adult life. Who did you grow up to be? What were your interests before you got this, intense interest in jihad and everything? What were your interests
Well, I
there?
had them very early on. I first read the Quran when I was in college, and I was interested in it because of my family's history, um, and my grandparents having been exiled from the Ottoman Empire, the last Islamic empire, for declining to convert to Islam. And I was very interested in what had happened there. And not much history was available. There's a bit more now, but very little about that part of the world, and that period in history is actually very well known at all. And in any case, I was very interested in it from early on, but it was just a matter of private interest and something that made me want to study Quran and then lead from the study of Quran to all these other things. But they were just peripheral, really, in
What
the
did you
sense that,
what did you
huh?
focus on? What was your foreground focus? Were you politically interested or were you apolitical?
I was political, but I was mainly a writer. And so all through the 90s, I was a copywriter, an advertising writer, a ghost writer. Ghost wrote a bestseller, and I can't tell you which one, though. And that's what a ghost writer is, anyway. At least a
Hmm.
good one does not reveal what he writes.
Hmm.
And that actually led to my doing work on Islam in a
How?
professional way because I was working with some publishers, and one of them started sending me because I had a very good friend who was my contact with the publishing house, who had been somebody I had written for when he had been the editor of a magazine and a couple of magazines before that. And then he moved to this publishing house, and so I was writing advertising for him, and he started getting me to vet material they got. And so we got to talking about what I was able to vet. And he eventually started to vet material on Islam. And then that led to his referring me to other people so that I was consulting on a private basis in the 90s for several individuals and groups about Islamic issues and jihad issues. And then one of them asked me to write a book after 9/11 to explain all this that was going on, mainly because I kept complaining to him that it wasn't being explained properly in the coverage that I saw right after the event. And so, because I had all this material ready to hand and had been studying it by then for 20 years, I was able to put together a book by December of 2001. And that was my first book, although they held it and it didn't come out until September of 2. But in any case, that's how it all happened.
Did that end up being one of those New York Times bestsellers?
No, but it was very close, and it got to number 10 on the Amazon list, and surprised me beyond measure with how well it did. And since,
Congratulations.
well, thank you. I'm still surprised, to tell you the truth. And because it did so well, that, of course, also led to other things, to invitations to speak about these issues and to write more books about it. And it was actually my fifth and sixth books that were the New York Times bestsellers. And so, one thing led to another until finally this is all I do now.
How did you come to the blog Jihad Watch in there? Was that an early interest or how did you put that in there? Because I think that now if you're
Well,
most
that
famous for
actually,
one thing, it's Jihad Watch.
yeah, you, I've never before revealed this, but Jihad Watch exists because of J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye,
No.
who I never knew him, but and so you can't blame him personally, but he wrote something once that impressed me very deeply, and that I have actually always kept in mind and followed, and that is that the book that a writer should write is the book that he wants to read but that doesn't exist.
Yes.
And so that's all the books that I've written are like that. And the JihadWatch blog is also like that. That I wanted a place where I could go, where I would find all the jihad news and analysis of it that would cut through the media nonsense. And so it wasn't out there. So I invented it.
Hmm. And you just set it up from one day to the next?
Oh, actually, it took weeks to set up because of various technical issues. I was working with a man who now hates me, Charles Johnson of Little Green Footballs, the famous former conservative blogger who was at that time the leading conservative blogger, but has since turned and decided that all of his former friends were terrible, racist, bigot, Islamophobes or whatever, and now has completely changed his direction. But at that time, we were quite friendly, and I did pay him to do it. It wasn't a free thing, but he set up the blog. He was a technical guy, something that I am not now or never have been. And so it took quite a while, but he set up the thing, and then I learned what I needed to do to update it and started to work. And that was in late October 2003. So it's 12 years now. No, I'm sorry, 9 years now. Yes.
Almost a decade of JihadWatch.
Almost a decade. Goodness, yes.
Did you find there was a big audience for that?
No, it's pretty steady. And it really has not changed for years now. It's about 25 to 30,000 unique visitors a day, which is real good compared to thousands of blogs, and also just not very big compared to the big ones, you know. But apparently it's a niche. It goes way up when there's a jihad attack, and then it goes back down again to 25 to 30,000. And so that's just where it's been for about 7 years. And so, you know, I think that it's not really so much the numbers of that in itself, but the fact that clearly it has become situated as a go-to point for people who want to know about these issues. And so that's all to the good.
Well, 25 to 30,000 is nothing to sneeze at. It's a really considerable number when you think of that day after day, 365 days of the year. Some of these are the same people, many, but others are people who come in every now and then or want to verify something every now and then.
Yeah.
So,
and I've seen quite a turnover. Actually, it's funny that the numbers remained constant, but the turnover has been absolute in terms of, and this is anecdotal, but nonetheless, I think indicative, that the commenters, there is a core of regular commenters now, and I don't read the comments generally, but I do when I go into the system. I see the latest comments and I see the names, and it's generally a very small group of people, probably 10, 20 names that keep coming up. But it's always been that way, and the names have completely changed. If you go back to 05 and 06 and 07 and 08 and read the comments, you'll see a core group of people that keeps commenting, and yet it's a completely different core group. And so I guess people, I don't know, they get tired of it and move on, or they learn what they think they need to learn and move on. But in any case, it does seem to have reached perhaps a larger number than is just shown by the numbers, the flat numbers themselves.
I think that one is most likely to comment as one is learning, and afterwards one may more often just read the articles, or, you know, if I'm going to talk about myself, that I may make comments now and then or be in a comment mode, and then it's like I just want to, I'm in a reading mode, which is a lot faster.
And I can certainly identify with people who have their fill of it. I have had my fill of it a few hundred times, and I just keep going on because it keeps going on. And so I certainly understand people commenting and being very interested and then moving on. But of course, as a kind of a leader of the thing, I'm not at liberty to do that myself. But it is certainly something that I understand. Certainly, the news is so repetitive that I have often been tempted to make a series of templates that Islamic jihadis calling themselves X have blown up X in X country and have killed X number of people.
Mhm.
You know, it's just the same mind-numbing, repetitive thing all the time. But I stand by the core mission of the thing, and that was to provide a central point
Mhm.
where the most important of this news would be reported, and also where there would be analysis of the media bias and the government bias about it. And I think that if I do say so myself, we do that job rather well.
Yes, you do. Now, what I've heard so far is almost what sounds like an organic drift. Like you had the personal interest in the Quran through family history. So you learned a little at
Hmm.
university. It was personal. Because of that little bit of personal knowledge, you got asked to vet stuff. Being asked to vet stuff, my guess is you naturally learned more because if there's stuff you didn't know, you'd research it.
Yeah, but it wasn't really a little bit by that point. I wasn't asked to vet until I had already gone way beyond having read a bit of the Quran. By that time, I'd read the Quran through several times and also had read Hadith and read biographies of Muhammad and so on, because it was something that, you know, the Quran itself doesn't really, it asks more questions than it answers. And so I was interested in finding those answers. And so, yeah, but you're quite right that, I mean that by the time I was consulting, I already probably, I had already gone beyond what people would probably think of as a basic level, and then and then that, of course, in turn stirred further
Mhm.
investigations.
Yes, it's very organic what you're telling me. And then you were asked to write a book because you were telling somebody the book isn't there. So, and then again, you created JihadWatch because JihadWatch wasn't there. Were there any
Yeah.
big turning points in your life along there? I'm presuming 9/11 was a turning point for you.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but um, yeah, certainly it was, in the sense that that's when it became something that I was doing publicly, speaking publicly about these things. Otherwise, though, it wasn't a turning point in terms of, like other people say that they had no idea about these issues and
Mhm.
suddenly woke up on 9/11, and I have tremendous respect for that, but I am not one of those. So I was already doing this.
What were there big turning points for you, or has it been like, as you've described it to me, that kind of organic flow with one thing leading to another to the present? Have
Oh,
you
yeah,
had some turning
very much so.
points?
I don't know. I'm not really sure if I would recognize them if I had. Everything does seem to have just gone on from one thing to another, and I never really had a plan. I just always knew that I was going to be writing, and the writing led me into all this, and so here I am.
Your last book, Did Muhammad Exist? Is that another of the books that kind of was organically came from previous questions and research?
Yeah, I did. I wrote a biography of Muhammad in 2006,
Hmm.
The Truth About Muhammad, and in that, I wanted to be absolutely faithful to what the earliest available Muslim texts said about Muhammad. And so, in getting to be very familiar with those earliest available Muslim texts, I found that there really wasn't a whole lot of historical value to any of them. And I was kind of surprised by that, because it's general conventional wisdom, and top historians will tell you that Muhammad is much better known, better attested historically than Jesus, for example, or Moses. And that was something that I'd kind of taken for granted. But looking at the Hadith more closely in terms of their historical value, found that there really wasn't much there at all. And so this was something that I have in The Truth About Muhammad as just a paragraph or two saying that the historical value of all this is highly questionable, but that's not really the focus of this investigation. This book is designed to show what it is that the earliest Muslim texts say about what Muhammad said and did. But then that was something I always wanted to go back and reopen the question of and reinvestigate. And so the two books, I think, are companions to one another. that in The Truth About Muhammad, I explore what the Muslim texts say about Muhammad, which most Westerners, of course, have no idea of what's said about him in those books. And then in Did Muhammad Exist?, I examine the historical value of those sources and find that Muhammad is largely a legendary character.
Can you see, is there something you're drifting towards now in that same kind of organic way? Like, maybe you've already written the next book, or is there something that is, what is it?
The next book is an investigation of dialogue between Christianity and Islam, between Christian groups and Muslim groups, and the possibilities and the parameters of that kind of dialogue. I made the mistake of giving it to a Catholic publisher, and so they have to take it to the Holy Roman and Universal Inquisition, and it's taking such a long time, and so I don't know when it'll be out. I'll probably write the next one before it comes out, but in any case, it is in the can. It's all done. It just has to be vetted by the censors, and in any case, that's going on. I'm also thinking now that with the war on free speech ramping up to such a degree, I'm thinking that maybe I should try to write a book-length treatment about the freedom of speech and why it's important and how it's under threat. I'm not really sure anybody would care, so I'm still kicking that around. But that is probably going to be, in some form, the next thing.
I think it's one of the largest issues of our time.
Yes.
The importance of freedom of speech and easy freedom of speech, as opposed to knowing that everything you say you're likely to be attacked for. Yes. And knowing that so much else you say you would be attacked if they got their way. But I see that you are doing your usual thing about going towards it. And how will you know if you feel like writing it?
Oh, if that never really enters the I've never been bored writing. If I'm interested enough to take up a project, then there it is. I guess that's already that. I'm not quite sure how to answer the question, because the screening process happens before I make the decision to go ahead.
How do you screen? How do you screen for a topic? Like your topics are all interesting. They're all really, and they're also major important in terms of world history and stuff. How do Christians and Muslims dialogue? But
I guess that's it. It has to interest me, and it has to be something that I think will interest other people. And if I get to that point with something, and I'm not sure how I can quantify a step-by-step process, that sort of happens in various ways. But in any case, once I get there, then I write a proposal for the publisher. And if it is something that flies with the publisher, then there we are.
But so I don't even write on spec.
Approach.
You don't write on spec.
People have asked me to write things. Several of my books have been other people's ideas. The publisher asked me to write Religion of Peace, Why Christianity Is and Islam Isn't, and Stealth Jihad, and of course the first book. Other than that, if I recall correctly, they've been pretty much my ideas. But I still have to, even if people ask me to write it, it has to be something that I can stand to write. It has to be something that I'm interested in answering. It has to be a question I'm interested in answering in the first place, or it's never going to get anywhere. I wouldn't be able to do a good job,
How do you, everybody who deals with these subjects gets a lot of opposition. What is that like for you? Is that a pleasure, countering it, like, taking it on like fighter? Is it tiring? How do you deal with all the opposition that comes?
I do think I'm kind of a competitive individual, and so yeah, I think that is something that I take some pleasure in, the intellectual exchange and the counterpoint. But at the same time, there really isn't a whole lot of intellectual exchange with leftists and Islamic supremacists. They are generally what surprised me about this is how venomous, how vicious, how uninclined to deal with the ideas and more inclined to engage in personal attacks and smears and all sorts of things. These people are. And so I don't really have hope of genuine intellectual exchanges. I did when I wrote the first book. I thought there would be reasonable people who would take up my points on the other side and deal with them reasonably, but that was very naive.
I think the weak side usually does that. If I'm remembering from anti-feminist things where the anti-feminists would go, bra burners, man haters. Really good, name calling.
Yeah.
In other words, they had nothing substantive to hold out against equality between women and men. So call names. If you were for black rights in the South of the United States, nigger lover. In other words, call names. You have no evidence why, people of different races are not supposed to be treated equally. Do a little name calling. Be a little violent. So I think you can almost say they don't have a leg to stand on. So what they do is they are nasty and threatening. On the other hand, those nasty and threatening people can be pretty nasty and threatening.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what sort of amazes me is that these people behave this way, and they're still taken seriously in the public square. I mean, like, there's this guy who has sent me, I don't give my whereabouts out because I have a lot of death threats. And this guy has, this leftist writer has sent me what he thinks is my home address and what he thinks is information about my family. And the threatening intent is quite clear, that he's saying in a veiled way, I know where you are, and if you keep this up, you're going to be physically harmed. And so, this guy is a thug. And what is amazing to me is that he is still taken seriously and writes stuff up in the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times and so on, attacking me and my colleagues. And I think, well, what's amazing about this is that nobody stops and says, well, wait a minute, this guy is just, this guy ought to be shunned from polite company. This guy is somebody who issues veiled threats, and he actually is calling for restrictions on the freedom of speech in what he writes. And yet all that seems to be just fine. I mean, it's incredible. But
what is that like for you? What is that like for you? Because for me, on one level, it's incredibly mind-boggling. Like, how can that be? These people were all, very often they were for women's rights. Very often they're for gay rights. Racial equality, of course. So one would think that, well, of course you'd be for freedom of speech. Of course you'd be against Sharia. But instead it isn't. To me, it shows the way people are often still deeply psychologically messed up. But how do you deal with it emotionally?
Well, I deal with it by remembering that what I'm doing is in the cause of human rights. And so these people who are saying that I'm a racist and a bigot and so on, well, I know me, and I don't believe them because I know what I'm doing this for, and I know what I'm all about. And so it's not really like what they say bothers me personally, like it worries me or something. It's just kind of amazing to me how they can do this and work on this gutter level with the smears and the defamation, and it doesn't seem to trouble anyone who deals with them. I think that there's an increasing tolerance for real fascism and hatred on the part of the left and the mainstream that the left controls. And that's not a good sign for the future.
No, it isn't. It's quite dangerous. Have you ever felt like quitting? It doesn't sound like it. I'm just going to ask.
No, I could never do that. I believe in what I'm doing, and so it is what it is, and it will lead where it leads.
Why do you think they are like that? Why do you think there's so much resistance to what I consider self-evident truths?
I don't know why there's so much resistance to self-evident truths. I wish I did know. it's a mystery to me. I think that the Muslim groups in the United States have very skillfully portrayed themselves as victims, and as a result have uh, been able to play upon the fear that people have of appearing racist and hostile to embattled minorities who are victimized supposedly by the larger culture. And so that, of course, plays right into national traumas and traumas of Western culture in general, and certainly to fundamental preoccupations of the left. And so the Islamic supremacists have played the leftist establishment like an accordion and have been able to get it to betray all its core principles, or all its stated core principles, by portraying themselves as race victims when, you know, Islam and jihad is not even a race to start with.
Yes, and in any countries where they are dominant, you certainly don't have a lot of equality there. I'm seeing what you are doing. In general, like, you're doing what is right for you as a writer. You're getting your voice out there. You're also, you know, as a writer and as a speaker. What do you see as the best strategies in general, very important strategies in general for stopping this? The wave towards less freedom of speech, more fear, more repression.
I think that the best way to stop it is to confront it head on, to call it what it is, to note that what is happening, to challenge our elected officials, to deal with, to take seriously their own pledge to preserve and defend the Constitution, which they all swear in saying, you know, and thus to note threats to it accordingly. But this is not happening because people are stymied by the fact that Islam is a religion. And Islam certainly is a religion. I'm not one of those people who says Islam is not a religion. But Islam is more than a religion. It's a political and social system that is authoritarian at its base, and is in contradiction as a system for societal order to many of the freedoms and the principles that we take for granted. And consequently, it has to be, I think we need to push ultimately for a change in how it is regarded in the in Western law and in the body politic in general, as not a religion, but as also as a political and social system. And as a political and social system, one that ought to be held accountable in all the ways that political and social systems are in our societies. And if that were done, then I think we would finally start to be able to make some headway against the challenges that it poses to some of our basic freedoms.
Do you consider it too difficult to take on redefining the limits of religious freedom? Because I think all religions have a political component. For example, if a religion is anti-abortion, that's a political component. If it shames women who get pregnant outside marriage, if it's against sex outside marriage and or wants no divorce. So, you know, I personally see that all religions have a political component. Now, Islam way more because, you know, world domination, a universal caliphate, etc. Okay, so that is like incredibly. However, would you see it as a productive route to take on the amount of freedom of religion that is given, or to see that some other priority? For example, if you want to kill your firstborn in the name of religious freedom, it still would be considered murder.
Well, I'm all for religious freedom. You know, I don't really think that we need to restrict any religious freedom to deal with this challenge. I think that the recognition that I've been talking about of the political and social aspects of Islam would be enough. And then if people are willing to enforce the laws that we have now, then we would go a long way toward resisting this. because that honor killing would still be illegal, and and these other things would be illegal that many people in the West seem willing to tolerate if it comes from Islam, because of course Muslims are agitating for that kind of acceptance, and also because they portray themselves as these victims, and they get people to sign on to the idea that we have to accept these things if they come within an Islamic context. So that has to stop. And if we stand up for our own societal principles and our own existing laws, then we'll have gone a long way towards stopping this. I think we can do that while also upholding the principles of religious freedom, simply by recognizing that religious freedom ends where the rights of other people begin. And so Muslims do not have the religious freedom to enforce Islamic blasphemy laws on me and restrict what I'm saying. And so in the same way, as far as other religions go, I don't really have a problem with religious people working within the public square to try to convince others of their point of view and get laws passed that they like, just like every other group that's not religious does. And if they win, and they lose. But that's a different kind of motion from trying to impose Islamic law over us, which would ultimately be the end of that free give and take and that public square in which people make informed decisions. It would be the end of it altogether.
I have two more questions. One, where do you see we are at compared to 9/11, 10 years ago, when I think that was the first time in North America that Islam really jumped out into people's awareness? Where do you think, how far are we in terms of taking it on? I know that Islam is somewhere totally different. If you look at the demands right now for anti-blasphemy laws, I don't think that would have been demanded 10 years ago. And where do you see the anti-jihad side? So where are you in all this?
Well, I think that it's pretty clear that 9/11 was a great thing for the Islamic jihadis, and that they've made great gains since then, and that the American Muslim community has also made great gains for Islam since then by positioning itself as the victims of some sort of unjustified suspicion, and playing upon the anxiety of so many in the West to make sure that they're not seen as anti-Muslim and as racist and bigoted. And so they've been able to make great inroads. It's probably the best thing that's happened to them. And of course, at the same time, there's a great deal more pushback and a great deal more awareness on the other side, and lots of people out there doing the kind of work that I'm doing, and so that's all to the good. I don't think that the war is by any means decided yet, but certainly it's not been a good decade for freedom.
So you would say that there have been more setbacks than advances, though there are way more people who are aware. The pro-Islam side has made more gains over the last decade than the anti-jihad side.
Yeah, look, I'll give you an example. The Islamic Society of North America, Council on American Islamic Relations, Muslim Public Affairs Council, well, actually, MPAC, it's a bit ambiguous, but the ISNA, the Muslim American Society, CARE, and various other groups are explicitly named by the Muslim Brotherhood in a captured internal document as being their allied associations in the United States, and working, according to the same document, toward eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house. Okay, now these groups, Pamela Geller sent in a Freedom of Information Act request to the Justice Department asking for their records of their activities in conjunction with these groups, and got back this huge stack of papers. We've gone through a bit of them, but there's so much more. This huge stack of papers indicating daily, practically, and very friendly contact between these Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood groups and the Department of Justice. And you think, what would happen if we put out a Freedom of Information Act request asking for information between the Justice Department of interaction between the Justice Department and anti-jihad groups? Well, I can tell you, if you take the American Freedom of Defense Initiative or other groups like that and get our dealings with the Justice Department, you got nothing, zero. And so, who's winning? Well, obviously, these Islamic supremacist groups are in the driver's seat.
Because the government isn't bothering to pay attention or have friendly relationships with you, etc.
Bending over backwards to accommodate them and to deal with their demands and so on. It's really once we go through all these documents, I think it's going to and start to publish some material about this. She already wrote one article about it a while ago. It's going to surprise a lot of people as to the extent of these contacts.
And the extent of the lack of contacts on the other side. That is really astounding. I know that Bill Warner is trying to do something in terms of building up government contacts in Tennessee from the anti-jihad side. But what you're showing me is an incredible lack of contact.
Yeah.
That's a very telling thing. Not a very good piece of news. Not that it makes you want to stop. It's just like when you unearth something, then you can deal with it, or then you can start to deal with it. Do you have any messages to other people that you'd like to leave them with, to listeners? What to do? Anything?
Educate yourself. Find out what's happening. Realize the extent to which our freedoms are under threat, and dedicate yourself to their defense.
Very good points. It just also occurred to me that if you are speaking on the Islamic side, you don't have to be scared. You know, poor Muslims, there's no fear. You're not afraid that Robert Spencer's going to come after you and kill you. You know, Pamela Geller is going to hunt you down with hairspray. You know, there's just no fear. There's absolutely no fear. But if you speak against Islamization, everybody knows about fatwas. You've had death threats.
Well, it's also
a totally different situation. So that, well, actually, I'm not really, the person you talked about threatening you was from the left, threatening to expose you, but I had less of a sense that a leftist person would therefore know where you were than that this was sort of information that somebody who liked to hurt people could use.
Well, also, the thing is that he works with Islamic supremacists, and he can easily give them, I mean, his information wasn't accurate, and so it's not so bad, but nonetheless, he's trying, he's looking for me. Yeah. And also, the thing is that when we go to speak at universities or places like that, we have to get a bodyguard or two, and we have to go in the secret entrance and go out the secret entrance, and we have to deal with being shouted down and heckled and physically threatened and so on. If Noam Chomsky or Michael Moore goes to a college, he's celebrated as a hero, and he doesn't have to have a bodyguard.
What I keep getting the image is of people who went to the south of the United States in favor of racial equality, and how they were harassed and beaten and all that kind of stuff. Except then the media was celebrating these people. And now the media is causing, so the media has switched sides. The media is in part responsible for this, and the university system is responsible for this. So I'm just going to go back to your points. Educate yourself, and also educate yourself about the fact that you're the only ones who have to deal with fear. The other side can be very emotionally comfortable, safe. So if you don't take on something,
it's very safe. It's very easy. If I were to switch right now and start saying Islam is a religion of peace that's been hijacked by a tiny minority of extremists, and that the Christian extremists are much more threatening, and that the Islamophobes are much more threatening, and that we have to grant concessions to Muslims for Sharia in the United States, and so on, I would be celebrated as a hero and get
finally you've seen the light.
Speaking engagements all over the place. Oh yeah, I mean, these guys like Reza Aslan is a board member of the National Iranian American Council, which has been just reaffirmed in an American court as a front group for the mullahs, Islamic Republic. And so this guy is effectively a spokesman for a bloody authoritarian regime. And he's speaking at colleges all over the place and is on Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and celebrated. And, imagine if you had a guy who was a board member of a pro-Nazi group in 1943 getting celebrated in the American media and on American college campuses. It would have been absurd to think, but nowadays this is just the natural order of affairs.
It is totally crazy. It is,
Yep.
To me, it is totally crazy that somebody who is taking on something frightening is seen negatively, almost as if this were the KKK as opposed to the other way around. Mm-hmm. I'll go. I don't want to end on that, so I'll go. Sorry for coming in with that, but I'll give it back to you. Any last words again?
Well, fight, never give up.
Exactly. Robert, thank you very much for this interview. I really appreciated that you gave this your time and your attention with all the massive demands on your time, attention, interest.
Well, thank you.